everybody. I'm Dr. Joanne. I think I met you all this morning. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit for a bit because 7 weeks ago I fell off my bike and fractured my hip. So it was touch and go whether I would make it, but I didn't realize that hip fractures actually heal quite quickly as compared to a broken knee, which I did this one 6 years ago. So I'm all metal, but I got through the metal detector at the airport without setting off the alarm. So welcome to the session, and this one is about kind of, again, incorporating the arts into PAR, but as you learned, I'm kind of at the end of my career looking back and really thinking critically about my work and reflecting kind of quite deeply on the work and what we accomplished and the lessons learned. So I'm going to focus more on that than on the arts-based part of it. I have 2 clips that were produced to talk about the work that we did, and one of them we made 3 researchers and I sat down and we made a video of each other, and we asked ourselves questions about the lessons learned. And so that video I'm going to show you, and then it's much more interesting and engaging to watch, sound, movie, and action and color than it is to listen to me drone on. So, 2 movie clips will be shown. So let's get started. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm a visitor on the territories of the Nihilewik, Sinapek, if I've said that right, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota First Nations, and the homeland of the Métis. And I really appreciated being invited back to Regina and the University of Regina. I lived in Saskatoon for 9 years, a long, long time ago, and I left in 1996. And it was so nice to meet you and learn and be updated about all the wonderful things that have happened. One of the things I did while I was here was I was president and one of the co-founders of Immigrant Women of Saskatchewan, and I learned that it's a major force in the community. And so again, that's another example of doing, when I was a doctoral student, I was doing community development work while I was doing that. And it's interesting, the PhD research that I was doing on kind of multicultural heritage languages as subversion, didn't get me my job, but my volunteer work with IWS did. So you never know how things come full circle. So a little bit about the work I do. I told you that I did, since about the year 2000, I have been working in Victoria doing research on all sorts of topics. Primarily, it's working with racialized and Indigenous girls and young women. And an outcome of that first project, and I said that we had used very traditional methods, but at the end of the project, the girl said to me, we never get together, we never see each other, we never talk to each other, we don't want this to stop. Let's keep going. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, let's have a girls' conference. So we organized, the research assistants and myself, and it's just, maybe 6 of us, we organized a one-day girl conference in the Student Union building. And the word got out, and lots and lots and lots of people came. And for the first time, they said that they were in a brown girl space, and that had never happened before. And they said, let's keep going. And so that was the challenge to us as community-based researchers. Community wanted something, and really that was the first time they saw themselves as a community, as a group. So when they began to self-identify as a group and they said we want something, that's when we kicked into high gear. And as the end result, Antidote, which is anti-discrimination, oppression, tyranny, and exclusion, and this is the name that the girls developed for themselves, was developed as a nonprofit organization. And so so after that very first project, and that was the end result, there was a board of directors. We wrote up an application to the nonprofit to be a registered nonprofit society. They had a board of directors made up of some of the girls and some of the peer researchers and myself and a few other people, and that was the start of Antidote. And it resulted in then more attention given to their issues, and it became an organization that was able then to partner on further research with many other different faculty researchers, and several graduate and PhD students began to work with them also within the model of community-based participatory action research. So Antidote then was able to become the community-based organization that formed partnerships with so-called academic researchers. Although that kind of thinking, I didn't find of community and university, those kinds of binary divisions, I never found very useful, because what it required me to do was it required me to erase my actual years of investment in the community. I wasn't able to wear these double hats. And students who were, as the years went on, that they grew up in Antidote, and then they went to school, and they, by this time, some of them had actually gotten their PhDs, and some of them their undergraduate degrees, and so on. And so they were part of the academy and also from the community. So that kind of, we just wanted to give permission to ourselves to accept the fluidity of our lives, that we do move in and out. And so we weren't torn apart by this kind of debate that often takes place in participatory action and community-based research about community, university, there's an assumption of power in that kind of dichotomous way of thinking that doesn't recognize that power moves and flows as well. And depending on our context, we can be privileged and not privileged at the same time. So once we gave that up, that changed a little bit about how we thought about the work. And it gave permission for us to name and declare ourselves as an intergenerational organization as well, because we were doing a lot of work with girls. And what we found was that a lot of the peer researchers who were graduate students were in disciplines like education, child and youth care, social work, health, so in social service disciplines within the university. And they had been taught about the proper way to do work with youth. And so there was this whole orientation around centering youth voices or girls' voices. And that adults should not speak for youth or speak for girls. And it was called a girl-centered or youth-centered approach. Are you familiar with some of these kinds of conceptual approaches? Yeah, so what that did was it removed the ability of elders like myself who's sharing our knowledge and skills. It silenced us. And there are very few for minority girls from immigrant backgrounds. There are very few role models, feminist kind of powerful role models for them. And so we found the logic of that conceptualization, that kind of framework, denying the reality of our lives. So what I'm telling you these stories about to do is for you to, a lot of you are students, a lot of you are reading some of these manuals and textbooks on action research, participatory action research. A lot of you are taught in education classes about practice, about good practice. And it's very useful material to a certain extent, but when you're working with marginalized populations, you really have to ask yourself, is this colonizer's knowledge? Is how, in what way are these frameworks and terms and concepts that I'm using really reflecting and really facilitating the leveling of power, or is it keeping me in my category, in these supposed categories? So I'm telling you this story because when we declared ourselves as intergenerational, it kind of gave us permission to acknowledge elders and the older women in the organization as really having an equal role to play in a girl-centered organization. Does that make sense to you? So it felt a lot, everybody just kind of, it gave us space, it gave us room to actually be whole. And our organization, Antidote, then declared itself as a kinship-based model organization. Now, think about a family and a kinship model, and then compare that to a hierarchical colonial model organization. What might be a big difference here? And most formal organizations are colonial models. So anybody want to suggest some differences?
There's a hierarchy with power concentrated at the top.
Yeah, it's a very masculine model, a very military model, and compare that to family. Family extends outwards. There is still power, obviously. We're still talking about patriarchal families in a kinship, but a kinship model is that many members of the family are involved in raising the community up. Right? So that was the model, and it was much more of an indigenous model that we were building. And because we were also building an organization that was supposed to be for racialized and indigenous girls and young women, we had to really check our heads a lot. The research that I had been doing investigated the question of how do racialized indigenous girls grow up in a white dominant city. And one of the big things we found was that they are kept separate from each other. They do not see each other. When they're going to school, the indigenous girls are kept separate from the immigrant girls from the French language speaking population who are studying French as a second language. They call them the French froggies and the English muffins. So the English stream, right from the get-go, the education system is streaming and categorizing and fixing identity. So these projects that we worked on, they were over a period of 10 years, were funded by Health, Canadian Institute of Health. I think the BC Centre for Women's Excellence in Health also funded projects. So we did a lot of work in the area of health and identity. How did racialized and immigrant girls perceive their health? What access did they have to services? So there were many, many different projects. One of the projects, which I'm going to show you a clip of, is on immigrant girls as caregivers to their siblings. And it was an issue that they articulated in an earlier project that then we took up as a research project and involved them in shaping. Throughout all of this work, we used many different arts-based methods. And so I'll go through some of these arts-based methods, but really what I want to do today with you is to model kind of the participatory cyclic process of share, reflect, synthesize, and act. And so it very much is a workshop, so I'm going to ask you to do things, get into small groups, and then share information with each other, and then reflect on it, and then take an action. Okay, so if you're with me, let's go. So I've just talked to you about this one. Here are the research topics that we worked on. This question on citizenship, we found that because I don't use just a participatory action research model, but I'm using a feminist or anti-racist participatory action research method, which, and being feminist, it really centers women's knowledge and women's experiences and girls' knowledge and girls' experiences. And it asks questions about how gender and sexuality circulates as a structure of power in our lives. And an anti-racist one, which is that we accept that we live in a racialized society. So race is one of the intersecting axes that shapes our lives too. So we're using this a feminist intersectional framework. So I know that anybody in the community has never heard the kind of jargon of intersectionality. So intersectionality, just let me quickly go through that. So intersectionality, we used to talk about race, class, and gender, and talking about being doubly and triply oppressed. But that really didn't reflect how we lived in our everyday lives, how these structures of power work in our everyday life. And now we think about intersectionality as co-constitutive of each other. So wherever there's racism, there's always sexism. Minority women, racialized women's sexuality is always at stake. Racialized men's sexuality is always at stake. So when you unpack one, you're also unpacking their connections to the other. So race, class, gender, so poverty is always there as vulnerable, increasing vulnerability. So one of the things that we're thinking about these days is how citizenship also operates co-constitutively and intersectionally with everything else. So citizenship status, citizenship as identity, belonging to place, these are all elements and trigger the others. So, so we were trying to figure out what did that look like, how does it work? Caregiving, again, the girls, Indigenous girls and immigrant girls are called upon by their communities and families to provide care to the younger siblings. But we knew nothing about it. And so the research asked questions about how many hours do you give to caregiving? We found that some girls were going to school, in high school, they had aspirations of being everything that everybody else wants to be. They wanted to be actresses or doctors or lawyers or teachers, but they were giving 36 hours a week after school and taking care of younger brothers and sisters. And then we were thinking, well, what did that care look like? Well, one of the surprising things was they were teaching gender norms to their younger siblings. So for a really good example of that was the young Korean girl had a younger brother. And she decided that her younger brother was acting too girly and that he would never cut it when they moved back to Korea. So they were one of these astronaut families. So the father flew back and forth. And eventually the family was going to go back to Korea. And she took the responsibility of training her younger brother in correct gender norms to go back to Korea. So that was quite a surprising finding that a 12-year-old is tutoring the younger brother in gender norms. We also found that older brothers and sisters were able to teach their younger brothers and sisters how to survive racism and discrimination in ways that their parents had no knowledge of because they had experienced it in school. So this is all that, this is experiential knowledge. The question was, how do we make these personal stories political? And that was, so that's always a question. How do we amplify participants' voices so that they can speak their truth, but in their own way? Okay. So other topics that emerged in all our research with these, when you're meeting with your participants, and if you're building really good trust relationships and people feel comfortable, all sorts of things, unexpected findings are going to emerge, and you have to be prepared to address them. We talk about what do you do with disclosure of violence in your rape or sexual abuse in the family. If you're working with youth, you are required to report that, right? So these problems, how did we deal with them? We brought them back to the participants to come up with solutions that work for them. So these are some of the issues. Queer sexuality was a big one that came out. It's an issue for them in their lives, and this was the only safe space that they ever felt that they could actually be honest about those issues. So aging out, I don't know if you've heard the term aging out.
Only with respect to youth program.
So this is where youth might be in foster care or being a ward of the state, and at 18 they age out, and then all supports are withdrawn. I mean, that's a place of terror and trauma.
Or 16 if the system wants to
16.
emancipate you.
Yeah. If they want to emancipate you, isn't that hilarious?
That's what they call it.
So these are some of the issues that came up and we had to deal with. So I know that you're interested in the arts-based method, and I can talk more about these specific ways in which we use them. But so arts-based techniques of collage making, drawing and painting, mask making, graffiti wall and writing back, fashion design and sewing, upcycling t-shirt fashion shows, photo voice. Many of you have heard of photo voice, particularly those of you in the health sector. Video documentaries, writing, poetry, especially now rap and spoken word poetry, performance poetry, popular theater, image theater. A lot of this then produced products that could be incorporated into presentations to the public and policymakers. So it wasn't just an exercise, but in fact it was a strategic exercise so that we have tangible images that we could use then for policy change. Zine, sound and music. One of the most powerful tools was drumming. And you'll see examples. We used taiko drumming and indigenous healing drumming. So I'll talk, if you want to ask me later, we can talk about some of that. So again, the context of my work, it was feminist, anti-racist, decolonizing, community-based, participatory action research, girl-centered, and capacity building with peer racialized researchers. I'll just speak about the last point, capacity building with peer racialized researchers. So part of what I did in my research project was that it was really important to me that the experiential reality, be it reflected of being a minority or indigenous person, girl growing up, be reflected in the team that I put together. So I recruited a team of, I forget how many, maybe 6 or 7 young women who were in my undergraduate classes. And we had training sessions, and so they were taught how to do interviews, how to run workshops, they were taught ethical questions, they were taught stuff around risk, what to do when things kind of going off the rail. So they had, then when they entered to do the work with the youth, they had a great set of tools behind them. And it was their job to both recruit participants as well as work with them to develop workshops. So a lot of these arts-based workshops were invented on the spot by the youth researchers themselves. Yeah, I could talk a little bit more about this. So that's enough about me. Now, what I'd like you to do is actually do some work so that you can feed back to me. So I'd like to know who you are in this room and what are your experiences with feminist participatory action research, if you have any. What groups have you worked with, are you considering working with, and what's your relationship to these groups? And what do you bring to this workshop? And what do you want to know? So I thought maybe if you wouldn't mind just forming groups of maybe 3 or 4 and just taking a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes on each of these questions, and then have somebody in your group be a reporter and report back, just so that we can see who's in this room and what you're bringing to the table and what you want out of this workshop. So would you like to do that with me? So just form yourself into groups of 3 or 4 and kind of try to work with somebody you've never worked with before.
And how much time?
I would say probably 15 minutes. So maybe what we can do is go around to each group and just quickly summarize who are we, and then pick maybe 1 or 2 of these other points to report back on from your group. We probably don't have time to hear from every group on every issue. So just basically tell us who's in your group and then choose maybe 1 or 2 of these other questions that your group really got involved with. So which group would like to start?
So I'll start.
Okay, great.
Okay, so back here we have Jenny with ESIP, or Early Childhood Intervention Program, Mirta, who is a free agent right now, not employed but volunteering in the community. We have Denise with Saskatchewan Council for International Cooperation, and myself, Laura, with the Regina Food Bank. So we had an excellent discussion back here because we weren't really looking at any of the work that we do or even why we came here to discuss feminism. So a really good chat around feminism, oppression, how sometimes that feminism is perceived as a negative or a challenge or one of the controversial areas in the community. And then we just sort of shared a little bit about some of the exciting opportunities that our agencies have, including a potential conference with SCIC around feminism that they'll be working on, and just looking at our own work through that lens as well.
Great, wonderful. Should we just move this way? Oh, did you want to share something else? Did you want to share anything else? That you're okay, okay. Oh, that's good.
Okay, so our recorder and our speaker are different, so.
Share.
We are 6 plus 5 students, doctorate, master, undergrad. She's a nurse, she's a student at life. We have the community, you're doing yours on the effects of residential school. You're a musician and searching your political science and searching your nursing and searching and looking.
Yeah.
Looking for possibly doing public health. I'm an artist, OT, and doing my master's in film and arts education and voice. She's got her master's, she's an artist, she's working with several agencies, including the Arts Board, and working on arts and community involvement. And I think when I kind of describe people, I kind of talk about why they're here. We're looking at how the arts work, how this can be applied to our specific areas. Everybody has a different experience with feminism, and I think feminism is like that. There's so many different kinds of it. Anything else that you guys think we should share?
Great. I like that both groups are beginning to look at the work that you do through a feminist lens, that perhaps you had never seen it or claimed that you were working with that lens. And so part of it is asking yourself, well, how am I and why am I not? Or why is it that the work I do is not seen as feminist, or I don't see it as feminist? These are all really important questions.
Hi, I just wanted to add, when you said that, because the federal government has the Feminist International Assistance Policy, so they are basically mandating that you work on feminist issues, which is pretty exciting.
We're 30-year absence of any conversation about feminism in government. Yeah, thank you. Okay, how about you guys?
So we are a mixed group. There's a couple of research assistants and students, so Mia and Desiree, and then Rochelle and I both work within the community at community-based organizations. And so we bring collectively kind of a combination of experience with community and understanding of issues on the ground, and as well as some really good research skills and some experience doing community-based research with different partners. And I think what we're all kind of looking for is how to engage in community-based research in a way that's beneficial to communities and to make it not a waste of our time, and to incorporate to do it from a feminist, an explicit feminist and anti-racist perspective.
I love that. I love that you're thinking consciously about how to do it from a feminist anti-racist perspective, because there's really no formula. It's really about oppression and inequality and how to make change and lifting all people's bringing it down. So asking whose voices aren't heard, looking around the room and saying, where are my people? Yeah, and that's one of the very first questions that feminists would notice is that where are the women? Yeah. How about back here?
Okay, we have two students, Emily and myself. It took us some time to talk about like in terms of feminist participatory research, but when we thought about it in terms of the art work, which is working with theater, so at the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan, we have a project called Bridges, and that's working with newcomers and indigenous youth and adults as well, but working through the Globe Theater or Commonwealth with their artists in residence, and how issues of racism, marginalization, and all of those can come out in terms of working within the theater instead of just through lecture or, it's a lot easier to work through that.
Yeah, we talked about how exciting and powerful it can be to like learn about these issues through the arts.
I love that you've highlighted one important thing that I want you to take away is that you might think, oh, I or my organization, we don't have anyone with that expertise, so it's not possible. But one of the things that you do when you're thinking creatively about research is that you think about who in the community that you know is available, who has done this kind of work before, because this has been work done for many, many, many generations. There's lots of people out there who've been doing politically informed arts-based work, using all sorts of disciplines, arts discipline. And so there'll be somebody out there, and you're looking for somebody who is associated with usually a nonprofit art organization. In Victoria, we partnered with MediaNet, which is a nonprofit, really started by a group of feminists, nonprofit video artists collective that purchased equipment, did distribution together, that trained together, that had editing suites, and so they cameras, and they loaned them out. So they had a whole infrastructure in place that we could work with. So as a tip for those of you in community-based organizations who want to do more arts-based research, you don't have to invest a lot of money into it. You can build networks and partnerships, so that's one thing you can do. As I was saying to this group over here, is that it's really, really important to take the time to build trust with your artist person and really get their input into the whole research design and research question as well. It's not that you're going to run a 2-hour workshop and you're going to parachute in some spoken word artist and boom, you're going to have this powerful rap that some 16-year-old's going to perform. No, it doesn't happen that way. It happens the same way you build your own discipline. Slowly, carefully, with discipline, with rigor, with practice, with rehearsal, with crafting, with feedback, with editing, with taking the criticisms and learning from them, and that takes time. So in that whole process, people are sharing stories, right? It's in that process that the trust relationship is built, and it's in that process that you're posing a question, whichever question, whatever question. So it could be something like, give me a question that's of interest to you. Give me a question. You must have a research question.
Not my research question, but you were talking about people experience healthcare.
People experience.
Because healthcare and their interactions, yeah.
Okay. So you might be trying to investigate, say, non-traditional healthcare. Let's say you're working with a marginalized population. So you're working with, you're trying to seek information that you don't have, right? That's what we're trying to do, recover and research and recover. So you might say, what does your grandmother do when you get sick? And then out of that, of course, stories. And out of you trained your research assistants to pay attention and to take good field notes. So at the end of the day, what comes back to you is incredibly rich ethnographic field notes. The technology of doing research does not poof disappear. you still have to do thematic analysis. You still have to check back with your participants and say, is this what you heard? Right? And then in that process, in that arts-based process, you're giving them the feedback, and then whatever artistic discipline you're working with, that becomes material that is a resource for expression. And then whether it's dance or body movement or theater or drumming, percussion, etc., the expression is an artistic expression. And that's where the power and passion comes from, because you're expressing a direct experience. But again, what I'm saying is it doesn't happen like this. It takes care and thought. And there's lots of resources that if you search people who have written about their experiences, I should write about it, but I haven't had time, but I should write about it. Thank you for that. Yeah, here.
I can give a brief summary of some of the things that we talked about. Essentially, our conversations revolved around art for policy change and giving voice to marginalized. So maybe people who have literacy needs or who don't speak English as a first language, or who have mental health or disabilities and can't express themselves. Who can't express themselves or don't have the privilege of expression, and using art to tell their story and to make that a form of data collection to inform policy change.
That's exactly what we hope. I'll talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced with that goal in mind, because all participatory action research is a bit messy, unpredictable, full of tensions and contradictions, because really what we're really working on is social changes, social transformation, which means we're working within a context of trying to understand how power works in people's lives. So basically, the big goal of participatory action research is social change, which is confronting power. And but power isn't this thing that sits out there and we can identify it very easily. Power circulates and invades, is imbued in every aspect. It's like wallpaper of our lives. And so to be really, really cognizant all the time of the assumptions that we bring to the table. And I'll show you a clip of what happened when we try to do it. So it's kind of me, I'm doing the mea culpa thing here. And you'll see, when we sat down and we reflected and we thought of all the missed opportunities and all the blindness that we brought to the table and what could have happened. So just being honest, it's not about, me whipping myself on the back, but really trying to be honest and reflective about, oh my God, how did we do that? It's kind of that thing. So, you guys.
Sure. We lost Courtney, our other group member. She went to go plug her meter, but we're all students. Courtney was in justice, I believe.
Yeah.
Melissa, sociology, and I'm in a master's, and we're all here to basically learn, not really a strong association with a group, community-based group, other than this concept of an eco-museum, which is more on the environmental education and sustainable education side of things. So a little bit dissimilar to a lot of the work that some people are up to here. So I guess in summary, we're here to learn different approaches to community-based research, because I think a lot of these techniques can be applied to the eco-museum model in the future, but not something we're currently researching.
So I applaud that, and I encourage you all to take the step and try it with the caveats of care, and that it takes time to build trust, and bring your people in very carefully, and they need support too. And I was just saying that one of the dangers in my experience, one of the dangers doing this kind of arts-based work is oftentimes you're working with people who have worked in their discipline for a long, long time and are very disciplined people. It's not craft. It's a discipline that they practice it, they learned it, and they bring rigor to that practice. And that's great, but it's also a pitfall, it has its own inherent pitfall, because if you're too invested or indoctrinated into the disciplinary approach, there's a lack of flexibility, a lack of ability to listen to your participants that could be a side effect of being very good at what you do. And so you're looking for people who are really good at what they do, but are open and sensitive and flexible and willing to challenge their art, their practice in this way. I don't know, as a musician, for example, I don't know, let's say you played the guitar, and you played the guitar for like 50 years, and you're really good at the riffs and moving up and down the frets, etc. And all the kids want to do is bang and strum. And so you have to start with where they're at. One example of how we use percussion is where we're exploring questions of identity, and just say, play a sound, make a sound that for when you're angry. And so they make a sound, and when you're happy, they make a sound. And then we ask, well, when are you angry, and when are you sad or happy? And then they're all making sounds, and then together we talk about when that happens and how it happens and how it makes them feel. All sorts of things get revealed, right? And then together we say, there's some similar things, and then we make a composition out of their sounds. And the musician, artist, writes a score and conducts a performance, and that is taken to the policymaker. And then the youth write about what they experience, and they're getting the language to express their reality. So that's reflected in the writing. And when you talk to a policymaker and you bring your 7 youth in, and they're doing this incredible percussion performance that express, and every piece of their body is invested in it, and then they're speaking in this terribly meaningful and articulate way about the problems. Could be problems of poverty or abuse or violence in the home or discrimination in the school. I don't know what it might be, but it comes out and has a huge impact. So in that sense, in that way, arts-based methods are extremely powerful and are very participatory, but it must be done with care and sensitivity, with the same kinds of principles and values that we hold up in participatory action research. So, last but not least,
So we have Ishad, we have Jen, and we have
sorry, can you speak up?
We have Ishad, we have Jen, and Hansen. We have some students, research, PhD student, researcher. We started off talking a little bit about some of the work that they're doing, and one of the things that came out is research that doesn't only focus on the big picture. In this case was HIV among Aboriginal populations, but also the underlying issues that make these communities susceptible to these issues, and all the other things that are related to that, and bringing all that together. And then Hansen is doing some research about education on newcomer youth, and sort of the longevity of that education through an ecological method, just to see all the things that are part of those outcomes. So we kind of talked about that, but we also talked about those intersections of those minority populations, both newcomer youth and people, and also Indigenous people in Canada, and a few topics within that, and some deviations. And
Sounds like you had a really interesting conversation. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. And there's a huge amount of resources in this area. Given the time, and I think it's already 3:30, what I think I'll do is I'll just skip ahead in this presentation, and I won't show you this example, but I want to show you maybe this clip. And this is the clip where Veronica Pacini-Ketchabal, Dr. Ketchabal, myself, and Sandrina DeFinney, Dr. DeFinney, Dr. Tiffany is in child and youth care, and so is Dr. Petrova. And we sit down and we talk to each other about our experience of doing participatory action research. And this is just the rough cut, so it's still a bit rough. And I think it'll run for about maybe 13 minutes, and then I'll stop and then we'll have a discussion. Okay. So just keep in mind, how did this clip resonate for you? And so maybe we'll share, what meaning are you making of this clip? Is it coming?
Yeah. Do you have sound too?
Yeah, there is sound, but I'm trying to get.
As visitors,
Okay.
We started it.
socially visible and present.
Making this kind of video and giving ourselves the space to unpack our process and be very honest and transparent about some of the struggles that we face is so important, because in a lot of the literature on participatory action research, these kinds of struggles aren't addressed. And I mean, I think in fact we know that they're present in every single project. There's always hurdles, there's always silences, exclusions, lessons learned. And because most of us consider ourselves as researchers but also activists, our end goal is often to engage in a process that results in some kind of social change or collective action. And so sometimes at the end, honestly, we're just often tired. We have other demands on our time. We want to disseminate the outcomes of the project. We're writing manuals, we're doing presentations, we're debriefing with community, we're trying to find more funding, and so a lot of the complexities of this process often go unnamed.
And you guys can feel free to walk around. Yeah, definitely, because this is a circle. So
They're doing image theater.
it looks happening. Wow. I sense fear.
You're shocked.
You're collecting data and like collecting knowledge or something, getting knowledge, and then she's like recording it or something like that.
I think she's saying, don't.
Okay. Looking way too complicated.
Adam is a researcher, and I had to look confused because I'm looking for the app from the outside and I don't know what's happening, and they look weird, and there's one person standing, and we're just like playing a game, and then there's
So you guys were taking something random and then kind of like playing on the fact that like obviously you would think that it was going to be like a bigger thing. Research
So,
sometimes.
interpretation. So if you were a powerful researcher and you were bringing your own interpretation, then you had the power to write up that knowledge as truth. But in fact, it completely distorts what they're actually doing, which was playing
Yeah.
So they were learning about research, we were training
Yeah.
the girls how to do research themselves here. So it's a training, that's the
That's a good start. Do you have something to add? Ronnie, I remembered it.
Where you're part of the research process and you're not the one being researched.
Okay, so
That's mostly what I think of less open anymore.
so who's the researcher then in this, or researchers in this process then?
Yes.
Who is
Like the people being researched are sort of also
So-
researchers.
So are we all researchers? Okay, so not formal, no lab coats, we're all researchers.
We also didn't question some of the common assumptions that we have about listening to girls' voices, for example. We thought that those voices were pure, and we wanted to listen to those voices and go with those voices without questioning them, without thinking that those voices or situating those voices within neoliberal discourses or within globalization and colonial discourses as well. So we had a little bit of an understanding of the girls as being pure as being perhaps closer to nature, if you wish, and that I think trapped us in our research. And it's always difficult to bring those things up because we want to be closer to practice. We don't want to be close to institutional discourses, or we are actually trying explicitly to dismantle some of the institutional forces within research, and we want to come to practice, and at the same time we need to hold that practice not so dear to our hearts, but we need to begin to deconstruct or to open up where the meanings behind the practices that we implement with the girls.
When you come into this, any research has a focus. You know, any research has a purpose. It's unlike, that's what makes this different than a program. A program you can just run and whatever the girls want to do, you do. But when you're doing a research program, you've got a set of questions that you're exploring, and so it gives it a focus and a purpose. So that's
I found that for every day that we were creating like the curriculum, and we were trying to make it as emergent as possible, and we were trying to, you know, like have all these things, okay, if this were to happen, this is what might happen, kind of thing like that. But every day I would come home and I'd be like, actually they just switched everything around, and I always felt like every day we were starting over, which I thought was really amazing because that's like the whole process of like, you know, like a living and very organic understanding of what youth programming and like lived experiences is.
I'm not sure I hear what you're saying. Are you saying that you felt as though we worked so hard to put a plan in place?
Yeah.
And then during the camp, after each day was finished, at the end of the day, we would have our debrief and we would completely redesign.
It wasn't completely redesigned, but I felt like a lot of it would be shaken up.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, oh, okay, this is what we were doing, and this is what's actually happening. And if we deconstruct it further, then we realize and are able to problematize, like, what actually needs to change. And I remember just all those massive, like, drastic and critical changes that we made every day within, like the breaks between the days. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. There's like that element of responsiveness because we were responding to things that were happening and to our reflections about what had happened and the way that we had problematized certain things that we were doing. So, for example,
when is it legal to take human life in abortion? When is a baby not human?
When is it we talk about participatory action research? We engineered, I guess that's the best way to put it, we engineered the conditions for participation. And then we also responded to what was revealed.
who's doing it, that does end up happening, right? There's that kind of construction, artificialness that happens. But we were doing that to a much more greater extent than the girls were.
Well, I think there's another assumption there that we have to put on the table, because there's another kind of expectation or principle that was at work, in that somehow girls or youth voices were going to be authorized in this whole process, in the sense that it was their voice that mattered. And so we justified all our actions under the pretense that we were facilitating their voices. And so actually reflecting back on that whole experience, I think we need to be a lot more honest about the fact that their voices were coming through, but in a very mediated fashion. And I think that's a key learning for me, is all voices are mediated. Yeah. And in this case, we're just being honest about the degree to which we mediated and structured that enabling space.
So, but they're still in recovery, definitely. But residential schools were pretty recent. And so the community is still hurting and trying to heal. Do you find it affects your life?
We were constantly trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to put these girls who are mostly shy, quote unquote, how are we going to get them to kind of participate with the rest of the group? And to me, there was always kind of like a strange guttural pain that I would feel about that. And it was talking to our advisor coming from Surrounded by Cedar, who gave us a lot of Indigenous knowledge and advice, who mentioned that, you know, there's a lot of lived experiences that a lot of quote-unquote shy girls have been through, and it's not exactly just like a term that is shy, but it's unfortunately like a catch-all phrase that blankets a lot of experiences that aren't ever really talked about. So when we started deconstructing that and talked about like, okay, why could someone be shy? It might be because of gender roles or like cultural roles or trauma or something like that. You know, I think learning about that and kind of like taking it apart and being like, okay, we are gonna take these experiences and actually listen to these girls' experiences, like however much they want to say to us, and take it into account rather than just being like, okay, we're gonna say that this is what you are, so this is who you're gonna be with, you know. So
we say we want to engage in anti-racist, decolonizing, girl-centered power. But what does that look like? How do we do this in a way that does not reproduce dominant ways of thinking, doing, and valuing?
Each other and the earth. That it would take the gifts from the four directions, all the gifts, to come together, to work together, to help ourselves, each other, and the earth heal. We're in a time of healing. We as Anishinaabe, we call it the seventh fire. The Hopi call it the great purification. But we're in a time of healing. So it's not by coincidence that you have this beautiful circle of life givers.
About youth doing research or girls doing research in a participatory or engaged way. We think about research as a technology, as following a set of protocols and steps. And as Veronica was saying, you know, we believe in that there's a progression to this involvement, in this engagement, and so that ideally the best research is one that involves youth or girls from step one, the research and design and questions, all the way through to data analysis and dissemination. If you think about research and conceptualize it as community organizing, community development, community action, community transformation, the kind of work that we've been doing has resulted in a community organization that the girls are now part of, that they asked for, and that they are participants in governance as well, and leadership.
Okay, so that's our slide. So, what resonates for you about that? We just what are we doing for time? 10 minutes. So maybe what you could do is just turn to the person next to you and just share, say one thing each about what you got out of that, and what parts of it resonated for you. Take a few minutes and gather your thoughts. And if you have something burning that you want to share with our group, please now share. Let's start with this group. Is there anything burning that you really want to share in terms of what resonated for you in your group?
We were talking about the evolution, the debriefing, and things like the shy girls being able to participate in how they evolved and how that was discussed. So those things we thought were really important. Participatory action research is the debriefing, the working together, the evolution of the project.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. Anything that you guys want to share?
I think what I said was that the research was done, but it was not really formal, so the girls didn't know that you were researching,
But they came up with the story and they told you when they were ready and nobody pushed them.
Oh, they knew we were researching.
Oh,
So,
they did?
yeah, what this was, how we organized it was this was a 5-day summer camp. And so they had to come for 5 days, and I think it was in July, and they had to sign a contract. And at the end of 5 days, they received an honorarium for $100. So how the summer camp was organized was in the morning we did workshops, and in the afternoon we held discussion groups. So the workshops were arts-based, and the afternoon they were facilitated discussions. And so that looked a little bit like focus groups, but in fact it was less structured than focus groups. And then after that, the girls went home, we fed them and everything, and then the research team would debrief, and we'd get together, and then we'd say, what did we learn? And so that's that emergent aspect, and it seemed quite chaotic at the time, because we got caught up in that planning everything, controlling everything. You saw the seats set in perfect circles, and tables around the corner with all resources, and we spent so much time setting things up so that we would facilitate their voices, but in the process, we missed a lot. I'll give you a story, but we'll hear more. How about you guys? Thank you for that. Just so I can clarify how that happened.
I think something that was important to me, maybe I can speak for all of us, is the aspect of the research process being used by force girls and what that experience could mean later on if they're interested in pursuing that, or even just having a very different understanding of research.
And the empowerment of giving doing that research with them or giving them those skills so that they had that empowerment to go ahead and create and continue to have those skills for the future.
Yeah, that was really a very, very important aspect, because they felt that they were equal with us and that they were knowledge producers, and they also felt equally responsible for knowledge mobilization. I mean, I know that those of you don't know, some of you may not know that those are jargon terms in the research community. Right now, knowledge mobilization, it means taking your research findings and doing something with it. So, and SHRC, the funders, SHRC funders are really big into knowledge mobilization, taking research out of the ivory tower and putting it into practice. So we knew that, and we wanted the girls to be part of that. So that's part of what that training was about too. So, but you guys think that, yeah? Anything that resonated with you?
I think we said that in terms of what you said, art can be messy, and that we need to recognize that it doesn't have to be structured, and we can't, if we set up an agenda, we can't just stick with it, give a space for other things to come up with.
Yeah, for this group, we're working with youth, and they wanted to play, and they wanted to have fun, and so it had to be fun. It had to be engaging. So we knew that, but the danger of that was this youth discourse about what girls needed. And we had one researcher who was coming out of the school of phys ed, I think, and recreation, and she kept insisting, girls need to be active. And so yes, it's true, but it was such a doctrinaire thing that girls needed to be active. So she insisted on taking girls every day into the forest for walks and making them move and doing all sorts of playing games and things. And in the end, I thought about that, and I thought, how is it that she inserted her agenda so deeply into our research design? And how did I let that happen? And so these are the kind of mea culpas and second thoughts that I have. How about you guys? Did you have anything? I know we're running out of time, and I beg, if you need to leave, please do. We'll just wrap up.
I guess we kind of all picked different things that we really liked, like the deep conversations that we saw, and the unpacking the like shyness. One of the things that we talked about is that inability to always, see those like mistakes, like the power of reflection. And I guess just like if there's anything more that we can do to try and be ethical researchers and foresee those mistakes. Obviously, you're not going to be able to always see all of them, but just kind of what can we do to learn from our mistakes and to try and predict some of those, I guess.
I don't like the language of mistakes because mistake implies that you already knew better. And some of this learning is capacity building for researchers. I know we didn't talk about that a lot this morning, but researchers have lots of capacity building to do when they come into community. And so instead of it's a research practice, not a research perfect.
Very nice.
Just keep practicing.
I love that.
Yeah. Don't worry about perfecting.
Thank you all. So just key points, what I've learned. So thank you for sharing what you've learned, and everything you've said is really helping me, and I hope the rest of you, to really reflect more critically, more deeply about what we do about our practice. So key points, what I've learned is that arts-based methods are no panacea. It's just, that's my message about PAR too, like this raw PAR thing. Well, I can understand it because I was there, because, you finally found a tool that you could use that actually revealed and amplified your feelings. The personnel is political, and this was a tool that could shed light on that. But at the same time, it's messy and it's contaminated, it's not pure. And so being able to speak back
like
to
all
that,
research.
like all research, yeah. But at least, PAR doesn't claim to be pure. I mean, sometimes it does, but usually we're open to critical reflection. Arts-based methods are not neutral, that they are also embedded in relations of power. And the story I was going to tell you is, one day, one of the girls came in and she had a beautiful box with an eagle feather in it. And of course we said, oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And she was dressed in a very formal, long dress with embroidery. And we thanked her, and we complimented her on what she was wearing. And then we carried on with her agenda. And that agenda that day was mask making. You saw the image of it. And it had this fluorescent colors of feathers on the mask. And later on, as we said, what did we do? She had gone through a significant ceremony in her community, and she was presented with the eagle feather. I think it was a symbol of her passage into adult life. And we failed to acknowledge and give it the recognition that it deserved. And the feather was the play that we had. This was a beautiful eagle feather. And yet, what did we give the girls as resources for the mask? And they were making playful masks with these colorful fluorescent hot pink and red from China, and it was completely inappropriate. So in that sense, we missed an opportunity to go deeper. Recognize that arts-based methods or research tools are that they also shape and mediate the research findings. So that's one thing. Any arts-based activity must be open to research participants' needs as they unfold in practice. As any arts-based method can shape researcher-participant relationship, information, and experiences, and the context in which the research takes place. So, art, as I said in the beginning, arts-based disciplines bring their own rigor. Like when you use dance, when you use music, when you use painting, each of these disciplines have their own rigorous practice, and you have to be careful not to import that discipline into your research practices, into your research studies, because that just adds another layer. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for coming.